Welcome everyone, this is Kerjims channel. Now we are back to our new episodes of two similar champions and comparisons featured by Warplay, League of Legends versus the Mobile Legend Bang Bang. But before that, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click the bell icon so you will be notified to our new next episode video. Let's do this!
Now, Orianna is a champion that had a fairly unique development cycle because she went through what is called a bottom-up design. Now, the champion starts with the mechanics, starts with the gameplay features, develops the whole gameplay kit, and then after that figures out how to theme it. Now, this is a design style that champion designers for the past couple of years have very systematically stuck to what is called a top-down design, where they start with the theme, they start with the character, the gameplay sort of niche, and then build the gameplay features afterwards. Now, we usually start these out by starting with the characterization, with the concepts, the concept art and stuff, but that's not really true to Orianna's development timeline in this case. So we're going to go bottom up too and start with the different versions of her gameplay that didn't end up making it into her finalized kit. Now, Riot Zephyrus, who was Orianna's designer, commented that her entire gameplay kit had been designed and finalized before any theme conceptualization had actually started. So to create Orianna's base kit, Riot Zephyrus took a relatively simple approach. He started with an ability, and then he broke that ability into 3 separate parts. So this gave him the core of Orianna's gameplay. She'd have a controllable weapon that she could send out or return back to her, essentially in this version of the kit. And in those 3 simple abilities, Zephyrus had found a way to create a completely unique approach to traditional mage gameplay based on the inspiration from Sivir. Rather than slinging spells, she controls an orb that stays on the battlefield. And this has allowed Orianna players to leave their orb wherever they choose, as long as they stay close enough to it, giving way to a zone control playstyle that allows you to force enemy players away from specific locations on the map. Now, the real difficult part with the development of Orianna was finding an ultimate that fit in well with the rest of her gameplay. Now, Riot Zephyrus tried a ton of different things in a bid to create the perfect synergistic ultimate. One of the early versions acted quite similarly to Orianna's current E now, but instead of targeting an ally, you could attach the orb to an enemy, in a way similar to Lulu's Help Picks ability. In fact, we're guessing that Zephyrus liked the idea of this ability, but didn't really think it was contributing to Orianna's gameplay enough as an ultimate. Overall, probably wasn't actually that powerful, so he did save it later for a champion as a basic ability to use on Lulu later on. He also tried one version of the ability where Orianna's orb would become like this mini shock aura, although he didn't specify whether it was an instant effect like Blitzcrank ultimate or a damage over time thing kind of similar to Victor's ultimate. Although it matches better with Orianna's kit than attaching your ball onto an enemy, it's still not necessarily impactful enough to do her solid on her gameplay and make her a decent champion. With those 2 ultimates, if Orianna had either of those, she would have just been an incredibly weak champion. And overall, Orianna still lacked enough crowd control to be a true zone control character. Another attempted solution was actually quite crazy. Pressing her ultimate would simply give you an additional ball to control, so you would have 2 balls on the map. Now that is a pretty powerful effect, making it a strong candidate for ultimate, since it would allow you to essentially completely double your damage output, your crowd control effects, and your shielding capabilities, giving you just an insane steroid for the duration. Unfortunately, it was actually an absolute mess to control, and just program had tons of bugs. We have to remember this was way back, I believe Season 1, maybe even early betas when they started development on her, and it likely would have given Orianna a skill floor so high that only the very best players would ever bother to even use her. So the ideal solution to Orianna's ultimate ended up being a lot more simple in its design. Like her W, it's an AoE effect that occurs around the ball, rather than Orianna, unless of course she chooses to attach the ball to herself. Unlike her W, however, it gives a badass black hole-like crowd control effect that sucks all enemies into the center in this massive shockwave. So Command Shockwave achieved a few key things for Orianna. It really synergized incredibly well with the rest of her kit. It also gave Orianna some incredibly needed hard crowd control effects, and it turned her into a massive threat that caused enemy players to be extremely careful when it came to playing around her ball. It made her ball really threatening. So with the design of Command Shockwave, Orianna's gameplay was complete and just perfect, and it was equally satisfying to play as it was to play against, making her one of. Now with Orianna's gameplay complete, it was time to actually create a character that matched up with the abilities. The working concept up to this point that they had been playtesting with was simply a character known as Ball Girl, which goes to show how little focus they had put on characterization thus far, and they knew that she'd be controlling a ball. So Riot Zephyrus made his own attempt at defining the Ball Girl as a fully fleshed out character, having been inspired by Toho's Project Hong Meiling. Hong Meiling is a martial arts specialist, typically wearing a dragon martial arts robe, so Riot Zephyrus used this design as a base, and then they added in a Chinese dragon orb as justification for her ball controlling prowess. The theme was pretty simple, although hugely different from the Orianna we know today. As a character, she'd essentially be a dragon reincarnated in human form, but she'd still be the one in possession of her dragon orb. Now as a character concept, that's pretty cool, but for unknown reasons, the rest of the team decided to move in a different direction, possibly because Riot had other ideas for dragon champions at the time, or because they wanted to cover new ground rather than defaulting to Eastern design influences. The creative team and the art team got together and they came up with a new concept, one that would eventually become Orianna. The early concept art shows it pretty clearly. The new direction was this clockwork character, with Orianna being a clockwork girl controlling her clockwork ball. In terms of bottom-up design, this provided Riot with the context for their new champion. All that was left to do was refine her visual design, give her a name, and build out her character to create a backstory that would give the players something to resonate with. In terms of the visuals and the thematics, it's maybe a little bit lacking, but that's kind of what happens when you go with this bottom-up design style. You end up with an incredible gameplay kit, but a kind of lackluster theme. Overall though, Orianna is an awesome champion, and it's really cool to see what she could have been.
Orianna has one of the largest zones of control in the entire game due to the long tether range on her ball. This is something that should be abused at all stages of the game, whether it's early, mid, or late game. Let's talk about how you can be pressuring with Orianna in the early game. Orianna has one of the best early games in the entire game if you know what you're doing. The first thing that you should be identifying is whether or not this is a high or low range matchup. Anything that's mid to high range is going to be able to trade back with you using their auto attacks and abilities, while low range champions like melee champions are going to be unable to do so. This creates two distinct trade patterns, though the main core idea behind them is pretty much the exact same. With Orianna, the most important thing is you want ball to be on you if you are going to take damage. If you're not going to be taking damage, then you want ball to be in between you and the enemy champion. This is the most basic concept that you need to understand in order to succeed with Orianna. These are the only two acceptable positions for ball. Either it needs to be on you, or in between you and the enemy champion. There are no other places that you want it to be in the laning phase. If you are forced to use the ball in order to CS, then you want to return the ball to you as soon as possible. You can do this in two different ways. Either walk directly into the ball to pick it up, or walk out of the tether range so that it will manually return to you. The biggest mistake that I see Orianna players making in the lane phase is they'll use their ball to CS, and then they'll just leave it there, and it won't be exerting any pressure. It won't be in between them and the enemy laner. It'll be doing nothing. Ball placement is so important, and the majority of the time, the ball is just going to be on you, which is okay. When the ball is on you, it gives you additional resist, meaning you take less damage. If you're playing against something that is equal range to you, you don't want to lead with your Q. you want to finish the trade with your Q. You want to make sure that you auto-trade as much as you can because your auto attacks deal a lot of damage, especially for subsequent autos. It is so important for building a health advantage that you disengage with QW into equal range matchups. If you lead with QW, you're immediately going to get rid of your own resists, and your slow field is going to disappear faster, meaning they might have the opportunity to chase you down afterwards. By leading with your autos, you take less minion damage, and you'll be able to disengage using your QW instead of engaging with it. Honestly, if this is the only thing that you take away today, then you will still be seeing a net positive in your Orianna play, because you're going to be taking the proper trade pattern, which is so important. Now let's talk about melee matchups in the mid lane. In these types of matchups, you want to exert the insane amount of pressure that Orianna has the potential for. In a melee matchup, you always want to start a slow push as the ranged character. In order to properly initiate a slow push in the mid lane to create as much pressure as possible, you want to auto the melee creeps 2 or 3 times, and you want to auto the ranged creeps once or twice. Usually I will split these 3 or 4 autos between 2 melee creeps, autoing one of them 2 or 3 times, and one of them 1 time. For ranged creeps, I always auto the same creep 1 or 2 times. If the enemy champion is not pushing, this will be enough for you to start a slow push. As ranged into melee, most of the time they're not going to be able to contest your push, so they won't even try. But if they do, you can feel free to auto them, use your abilities on them until they back off, and then continue shelling away. Remember, the most important thing here is getting the last hits. Some melee champions might be able to match your level 1 push, but they're going to have to forfeit the last hits on those creeps in order to do so, in which case you always come out ahead. It allows you to trade into matchups that are less heavily one-sided towards you as Orianna. If you're able to use these things on top of keeping the ball in between you and the enemy champion, and on top of yourself whenever you're taking damage, you're going to be seeing a lot of success in the laning phase. However, Orianna isn't just a laning phase pick. You need to be able to play her in the mid game and late game in order to see the most success possible from her. The mid game, in my opinion, is the hardest time to play Orianna. It's at this stage in the game where oftentimes you're going to have to go into the side lane in order to pick up CS, which isn't always a safe thing to do. On top of this, mid-game fights are much more drawn out as opposed to late-game fights. This means you're going to need to hit your abilities, use your zone control properly with your ball, put the ball in the right place, put it on the right champion, this sort of thing. Honestly, this is going to be something that's just going to come from raw experience. The only thing that I can tell you here is the different ways to use the ball in the mid-game. It's going to be up to you to decide when you need to be doing each individual thing. The first way is you can just use the ball for zone control. This is similar to in the laning phase where you keep the ball in between you and the enemy team. If the enemy team oversteps, you're able to nudge the ball forward and get an ultimate off, trying to catch as many members of the enemy team as possible.